Please welcome the panel on A View from the Top, Leaders on the Roles and Goals of Corporate Boards in 2023, moderated by CNBC journalist and co-anchor of Squawk on the Street, David Faber.
All right. They put the tall guys over here.
Yeah, that's how it works, man.
This is my iPad, so if you have questions, apparently you can hit the QR code, and then I will try and work this and see what they are. We'll try and take some questions from the audience towards the end of the panel. But we got a great hour ahead of us here. Everybody can wave at everybody. You good? All right. A View from the Top, Leaders on the Roles and Goals of Corporate Boards in 2023. Let's start with corporations as agents of social change and whether or not they should be. Ursula, you've been on a lot of different boards, and I know any number of thoughts on this. You and I have had some conversations in the past around when you engage and how you do. It feels to me recently, though, that a lot of companies wish they hadn't engaged at all. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that and start us off.
Yeah, I think that the fact that they wish they hadn't engaged is proof that they should engage. Right? These are issues that are critical to society and the future of society. Not every issue, obviously, can you engage on, but things like how you treat gender in your company, how you treat race in your company, how you treat the environment in your company, all and its effects are all things that corporations and corporate leaders have to have a point of view on. We employ hundreds of millions of people around the world. The people who buy our stuff are citizens of the world. And if you look at what happened in the past, for example, when South Africa had a policy that black people were basically chattel, companies had to actually come out along with governments and say that was unacceptable. And that force helped to change the course of history or the future in South Africa. We have the same types of responsibility here. Women's rights, affirmative action, particularly in education, big deal for companies, educated workforce, a diverse and educated workforce. Based on what's happening today, we'll have an educated workforce that's not diverse. So I think it's really important that we actually stand up and get behind what we believe. Not every issue for every company, but there are some that are unavoidable. Race and gender are unavoidable, and we have to face up to it. Now, the people in this room are fairly privileged, right? They're mostly white, they're mostly men, that's true. So you guys have your voice in the room already. People that look like me and women generally don't have a voice in the room, and their voice is almost unheard in the structure of corporate America, so CEOs have to represent them as well as they represent themselves who are in the rooms. So I think it's absolutely required.
Betsy, as the other woman on our panel, I'll give you the second word here. I mean, do you agree with Ursula, or do you sense that there are times when it's not right to necessarily speak up and or there are certain issues that you have to speak up about?
I think that corporations need to stay focused on what's important to their customers and what's important to their business. And when you pick a topic, it has to be relevant to your brand and your company for it to be sensible for you to opine. If you're engaging on every social issue and every political issue, then I think that you run the risk of causing distraction in your workforce and division, because politics are divisive. So if it's on, the value of key principles that you're speaking about, that's often already in everybody's environmental, social, governance, the sort of 4 pillars from the World Economic Forum of, prosperity, planet, people, principles of governance. I think that's a lot covered. So I guess the question that I would raise is, our millennial and Gen Z cohort are pushing CEOs and companies to have a social and a political voice. And I think they're conflating politics and social issues into your company's values and principles. So I think you run the risk, if you're not careful, of having your workforce consuming their mental calories on social and political things, not on the business of the business.
Can I just add one thing
Please.
here? And I think about it. When I was the CEO of Xerox, we went to Washington and we talked about tax policy all day, all night. Tax policy, what would be good for us, bad for us, etc. Tax policy feeds a set of social programs and social issues. We seem very comfortable to talk about something like that because it affects our bottom line directly. And we then say, oh, by the way, nothing else, right? We push for things that we can measure on for one stakeholder, and that's the shareholder, and everything else we're starting to back away from the importance of building a society, particularly in this country, that is future ready. And that society needs women, and in order to have women who fully participate, they should have control of their bodies. We need black people, brown people, Spanish people, etc. Who is going to represent them if corporations stay quiet? I just think it's too easy to walk away from this issue.
Bill, you want to? First. Well, Bill, you're running a large public company right now. You're also chair of its board. So weigh in terms of how you view things and when you choose to, as a board member or a CEO, get involved, and when you choose perhaps not to.
Sure. I think Ursula and Betsy said it well. You got to be intentional about the things that you choose to focus on. DEI is not a choice. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a choice. It's a have-to-have. ESG is also, for us, a have-to-have. But I think the key, why is it a have-to-have? Because it's a real business impact. You know, when you're in the software business, society's biggest challenges are also your biggest market opportunities. So you're intentionally focusing on it because you think that you have a big market to capture. It's not just the right thing to do, but it has a very large business impact. So for example, when someone says you're investing triple-digit millions in ESG, it's not just because it's the right thing to do, it's because there's a very intentional market opportunity behind it. And that's what we try to do. Align the board and the management team as a digital dream team. What is it that the board and the management team can align on strategically, be highly intentional, and then execute?
How do you, do you feel like how do you align your board? How do you communicate with them to the extent that you feel like they fully understand what your strategy is and that you are actually on the same page, so to speak?
That's a great point. You know, that's the purpose of a good board meeting. A good board meeting is not a self-congratulatory session for a day and a half. Instead, it's really assessing the market dynamic, the market opportunity, and spending time on the things that aren't working so well. So you take full advantage of the skills and the knowledge of the board, but also finding time to focus on that strategy and constantly keeping that strategy front and center. One way we do that is we have an offsite each year that's dedicated for 2 days only to strategy. Yeah. So you got the memo because you were there for 2 days working on it. And then it's our job repeatedly to go over that strategy each and every time we meet as a board. That's how you gain alignment. I believe that, and Ursula, this goes back to you and me working together at Xerox, anything worth communicating is almost always under-communicated. So you just can't overdo the communication on the strategy and the involvement of the board enough.
Jarvis, I'd love to get your take here, particularly given, you know, obviously you're not just an asset allocator or alternative investment advisor, but you also are chairman of the board of trustees of the teacher retirement system at Texas. I'll say that again, Texas.
Well, you know, first I'll start off by saying most of what we do in Texas, I don't have to tell you because you hear about it, you read about it in most of the publications. But, you know, to me it goes back to sort of some of what everybody's talked about. First, you know, shareholder value, supply and demand. I mean, if you've got a homogeneous board, making decisions as you're trying to sell to a multi-ethnic, heterogeneous environment, then there's something missing there. There's something that board's not going to talk about. There's an issue they're not going to understand. And, just because you're from a certain area doesn't mean you understand everything about it, but we all come from different backgrounds. And so I think it's absolutely critical that the C-suite is diverse and the board is diverse because, look at America. This is who we're marketing to as companies. And we're not going to maximize shareholder value if we don't understand the different perspectives that drive supply and demand.
100%. May I build on that, David, for a quick second? What Jarvis just said? So if you take an enterprise software company like a ServiceNow, people said to me initially when we recruited Larry Jackson to be on the board, Larry Jackson was with Apple Music. What's the correlation between Apple Music and ServiceNow enterprise software? Everything is the answer, because he's coming at it from a total different angle. He's bringing a creative approach that we don't have in that boardroom. It's because he's not like us that we want him, because he'll teach us something. Similarly, we just put Deborah Black on the board, and she is a technology leader at Netflix. What's the correlation there? Well, we want to be the Netflix of the enterprise where you're building innovation into that platform because trust is the ultimate human currency, and that's how you sell innovation. So what I'm saying is, Jarvis is absolutely right. Different skill sets, diversity of all kinds make the boardroom interesting. If everyone is the same, it is a really boring day and a half, 4 times a year.
Yeah. And it turns out that you can't get that base up if you ignore some of the fundamental social issues around education and access to education, around health and access to health across. You're just not going to have enough people. We've seen that already. So you actually can't ignore the world and operate a business. And I tell you, it's easier to do that. It's easier to ignore the world and operate a business.
But what about, as you introduce these very important social issues, do you get into a situation where your workforce has differing views?
Of course.
And then when things devolve to being social and political, you start to have a divide, and people get, focused on what they didn't like about the other person's view, and you want a diversity of the broadest ideas, and you really, your values are tolerance and inclusion. And to get the best outcome, you want different ideas. And if you've demonized people whose views are different, which is what happens when you get into these touchstone, highly emotional social issues, how do you get the team back collaborating? They had a situation I thought was sort of interesting over at Netflix, where they pushed for years content that was all on one side of the political perspective. And then finally, they were missing half of the viewing cohort in America because the content creators were creating what they felt good about, and that was the message. And finally, they had to change leadership and put a memo out to the employees saying, if you don't like content created that doesn't support your views, go find another job. We have to have content for all appetites. So I'd love your thought on that, because that's my worry.
Yeah, I can. Go ahead. I can add. I think that that's the senior management's job, is to understand the dynamic of their employees and manage that conversation in such a way. It might be training, it might be other things that they do so that people don't feel like they're having the fingers pointed at them, but more so, we just want everybody to feel like they're at the table, their voices are equally heard. And so I think that's the CEO's job, to manage that atmosphere. Now, take that to the board level. I think you get to the point where that board chair or that lead independent director, look at boards now. We have the specialty director, many of them cyber, et cetera. Well, typically there's, and I'm going to stereotype, there's an age gap there. So there's generational issues that lead director has to manage. We've got the pandemic, the supply issues. We've got more and more diversity on boards. Ensuring that these people have moral courage, quite frankly, and the psychological safety to speak up at a board meeting. They're younger, the old guard is there, it's the way it's always been done. So I think from an administration perspective, that's the CEO and senior management, and on the board, that atmosphere is created by the leadership of the lead independent director or the board chair.
And I think that
Chris, I'd love to get Chris in. I haven't heard from him yet at all. And I should just say, I mean, somebody who led a very high-profile proxy fight successfully for a board that Ursula still sits on, ExxonMobil. I'm sort of curious again to come back to roles and goals of corporate boards. What do you want to see from those people you're electing to that board?
Well, companies have impact on societies regardless, just because of the impact they have on the communities in which they operate, the products they sell. I think that the movement, many components of the movement, we'll call it the ESG movement, has not been properly linked or explained to the value that you're going to create to companies. So therefore, it comes across much more as an ideology, as a way to improve the company's performance. And a lot of that is because the movement became popular without a lot of data sets of supporting some of the components. And so therefore, it seems like an ideological point, and it has been therefore weaponized as an ideological point without pointing to the fact that that many of these impacts, like the fact that governance is controversial in ESG. Like, it's governance. Like, that is a core driver of value creation. Environmental impacts, it needs to be managed. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't believe that we all should try to do better. Now, the social is the area where there's not a ton of supporting data about how to directly tie that to. Now, we all go back and we still, I think, talk about the McKinsey study that was done, I don't know how many, 20 years ago, about this. But clearly, you want to be able to have, you want to be able to attract, retain the best people and have those best people feel comfortable in an organization. So therefore, you need a strong culture that supports those people and multiple types of people and multiple different opinions, multiple races and genders. This all should be common sense, I think, because this is what drives value for companies. But right now, that's not really where the debate is. And so I think we really do have to take a step back and start to use a language that ties together these different criteria to how it's going to drive value creation for the companies. And within that, communities are going to win, and companies are going to win, customers are going to win. And use that language instead of making it seem like we're talking about a social cause. It shouldn't be a cause. It's a way to really drive value for companies. And having diversity, for example, it helps drive value because it gives everyone a different opinion. We all make better decisions when we have more people at the table.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, Chris, that you and Jarvis made of, the management and the leadership bridging your values, your purpose, your mission into the social issues that especially your Gen Z and millennial cohort are pushing to have a voice on. And one of the ways that I think is helpful is to actually consciously create a policy on and do it with input from your organization at all levels on, when we'll speak, why we'll speak, how we'll speak, where we'll speak on particular issues. Is it germane to our customers and our business? Should we have a voice here? And by doing that, I think it may help weave that connectivity for your newer cohorts who may conflate social and political with corporate values and how you bring the best into the company.
Right. Yeah, I'm on such a different page, it's amazing. I actually think we're speaking around an issue that we're not dealing with the fundamentals. The structure that we're in today is unfair. It was built by white men for white men. By the way, I like it, I live in it, and everything is fine. To get to where we want to go, we have to recognize that this fundamental structure today is not right. We don't have enough women participating in leadership positions. We don't have enough brown and black people participating as well. So to say that we're going to wait for these guys to actually just have everybody feel better makes me uncomfortable. I don't believe, I run a company for a long time, that we can just change it all today. But I also don't believe that we can just use the normal processes where in most boardrooms there are no women, and almost surely there are no black people or brown people. How do they come up with the output that would fit me in the future? I think we have to be a little bit more assertive, a little bit more affirmative in thinking about how do we include these people who are more than 2/3 of the population of the world who are not in this room, women and people of color. 2/3 of the population of the world not in the room, being governed by 1/3 of the population with no perspective whatsoever about the lives that we live and what we need for the future. How do we become participating members of society? I don't think every company can do this, and I damn sure didn't do it every day, but I also don't believe that we can say, oh, everybody has to feel better, the employees have to feel good. I just don't think it's possible for us to get to the point we want to get to without being a lot more aggressive, a lot more disruptive about the status quo. That's all.
It's interesting if you look at the data on, if a company has a big social and political voice, does it actually pay off? And so doing homework for this, I saw an article in March in the Wall Street Journal, and it did a 10-year benchmark look back. And the article said the companies that were neutral outperformed by 30%. And, we were lucky enough to be at a luncheon today, and there was a professional pollster there. And I thought it was interesting, the stats that he said was that when companies speak on highly polarized, on social issues, that the consumers feel that you're doing it as a marketing ploy. And that it was something like 38%. I wrote the numbers down.
It is 38%.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. She pays very good attention. Felt that companies shouldn't be speaking quite so much.
That means that there's 62% that feel something else.
That's true.
Okay?
But
and I think we can kill this issue.
Oh, we can go on and on about this. But by the way, it is going to always take this, Bob Chapek probably wishes he'd been part of this panel before he made a decision that may have cost him his job, right? I mean, there are real consequences to some of the decisions being made by boards and the CEOs. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, Bill, about that in particular, the fight that Disney continues to be in Florida, about a decision that obviously...
His job wasn't to keep his job, though.
Say again?
His job wasn't to keep his job. His job is to manage a good company for the future.
But there were plenty of employees that may have disagreed
Probably.
with his stake. He obviously felt like he needed to communicate. And by the way, knowing him a bit, it was not a view he shared personally, I don't believe. Or at least he felt very reluctant to get involved in that debate, but he did so. I mean, Bill, again, when it comes to these things, how often do you go to your board and say, what do you guys think? What do you ladies think?
All the time.
Yeah,
I think
would say,
that's the way you use the board. The board wants to be involved. The board wants to engage on things that are challenging. They want to have an opinion on that. And many of these social issues, there's no preparing for it. So the more content that you can get from the smartest people in your company, and hopefully that's the board of directors, the better, so you can make really well-informed decisions. I think what's so important right now is to acknowledge that 40% of the CEOs that are at this conference believe that if they do not change the status quo, they will not have a viable business in 10 years.
Right.
So the idea of this strategy, the idea of digital transformation, the idea of really rethinking the way these companies run is where I spend the majority of my time, because that's where my company needs me and all the companies that we serve. So that's kind of a nice position to be in, because that's what people want to talk to ServiceNow about. But I can also tell you, within the company, to hold the culture strong, you have to have belonging groups. Everyone has to be able to bring their best self to work. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is a driving force within the company, and everybody is welcome in that tent. And I think Ursula and Betsy are right on in terms of the market. This is a giant market. You can't get there without including all people in your company to reach all the market opportunity that you have out there. So everything we do internally, we try to turn into an external lens on the market opportunity, so we don't get caught up in your cause is more important than my cause. All causes are important, but there has to be an internal filter for how we manage that, and ultimately what we do take to the streets when something is super important and we want to be very intentional about it. And we have done that, but that's not for every issue. It's the ones that we believe tied to our strategic values.
Jarvis, I want to go back down to Texas with you and just get the view from down there, in particular, how some of the people you speak to there would react to this conversation, and or whether ESG is a dirty word.
Well, there's a movement afoot. There's been bills filed. Our leg is meeting right now, and they're considering issues that affect the fund that I chair. So I'm chairman of the Teacher Retirement System of Texas. We're about a $200 billion pension fund that makes investments for our retirees, teachers, bus drivers, lunchroom workers. And there's a little bit of a move to eliminate the ability of our investment staff to be able to consider ESG-related issues as we make investment decisions.
It's that even governance issues. So
Yes.
with this, you cannot look at governance.
ESG is, well, I mean, it's become this thing.
Yeah.
Altogether, ESG, and is considered to be a negative. And so, of course, for us on the board, with our fiduciary duty to our members, as well as our investment staff, those are issues empirically, it's been documented, that impact investment return. So, we've tried to work with our legislature. We're continuing to work with them to get them to understand that these are issues that we must be able to consider. And so we've made some progress. The bills have been modified significantly from what was first proposed. We're not done yet. We're still working on it. But at the end of the day, if something like that passes, then it really puts the investment staff and the board members in a really difficult position, because these are factors that impact investment returns. So we must have the ability to consider them as we make investment decisions.
But Chris, back to that question of measurement, which you raised as well.
Yeah.
Are we in a position right now, as a board, in a position to properly measure many of the things that we're talking about here in terms of their real impact?
No, I think the data sets around this, particularly the rating systems, are not very good. There's no correlation among different rating firms, and there has been no performance difference amongst, the ratings do not correlate at all with performance. However, there are components of each of these. There are components around governance, that there are some particular linkages, but not on scores. If you were to kind of define what good looks like, there's been some academic work on that, and that has shown. Environmental impact tends to have a linkage between the duration, durability, resilience of a business model, which it makes sense. High impact companies tend to have greater regulatory risk. The place where we have seen the most linkages is around risk. So within governance, risk. Within big environmental impacts, risk. We haven't seen that in social, because social is an incredibly broad category, so you would have to shrink it down. If you do shrink it down to something like health and safety, you can see impacts. And so companies with low safety records tend to underperform. So, and this is what, of course, the problem with using ESG to mean all these different things is it doesn't bring you down to the points that actually impact and what are material to each industry and company, because they are different. They're different for each industry on what are the relevant factors which can help drive long-term value creation.
So can we get there? I mean, is there a path to actually being able to get to accurate tools to really measure these things?
I think the more transparency leads to ultimately better outcomes. And as we're getting more transparency on a lot of these issues, now obviously it's also causing a lot of blowback, but as we get transparency in more issues, I think we will get there, but we're still years and years and years away.
Years and years and
years. Yeah, I think so.
So are we still going to fly blind for a long period of time with a lot of battles about a lot of things that we can't measure?
If you invest only off ESG rating systems, I do not think you'll outperform. I do think, however, that there are components, because we haven't, again, getting down to this materiality by sector. We need to look at materiality by sector, and of course there are some commonality, which is if you look at companies that have higher retention rates, they tend to outperform. So the question is, which of these criteria can we tie back to higher retention rates? So there are a few of these issues, but I think from a blanket level, I think it's going to be a long time before we're going to be able to think about ESG as an investment strategy.
I would just say, building on this, if you think about ESG, it touches so many different things in a company. Part of the governance that Chris is talking about is integrated risk management. Everyone in this room here and every boardroom is worried about security. We have everybody focused on net zero, and there are actually targets and goals associated with that. So how can you have a sustainable company if you don't have a sustainable workforce, if you're not a good partner and you don't have ways in which you can measure the network effect of what your company is doing? The point is this: there's an app for everything, but nobody wants every app. These companies are a mess. There's a half a century of point solutions everywhere. So what we try to do is aggregate ESG in a box. So you come by industry with ESG in a box on a platform, and you take all those disparate point solutions and you plug it into the box. Now you have a dashboard, so instead of talking about large platitudes that don't mean anything to anybody, you're actually talking specifically about the things you're intentional about, how you're measuring it, and how you are or aren't getting better. That is what we need. Chris is absolutely right, and most companies don't have it. I met with a utility CEO. She said to me, "You can put this in a box? I can now see all these things? I have staffs everywhere, all over the place." I mean, right. Why do you have all that headcount doing that instead of taking care of customer service in the field? Absolutely. So the point that I'm making is this. Through the pandemic, there was billions spent on technology. Only 19% of the boards today that are interviewed and report on this say that they've actually gotten any bump out of those investments. And that's because they're not integrated into a strategy, and they're not properly managed, and they're not driven by a platform approach to digital transformation and business impact. And that's what you're saying. We need business impact. Otherwise, it don't matter.
Bill will be happy to meet with you all individually to sell you that product.
David, can I give just a quick example?
Bill.McDermott.
So if you look at proxy seasons coming up, you look at there's a lot of questions around how banks should cut financing to fossil fuel companies. However, there is no differentiation on lending money to a fossil fuel company if they're using that to decarb the operations, if they're doing it for carbon capture. So these aren't just terribly well thought out. You would think you want to encourage dollars to go to industries that are emitting to decarb. But no, that counts against the bank's criteria for lending to heavy emitting industries.
Yeah. We've got so many other topics to get to. We're also going to get to your questions. Ursula, though, I would love to just come back to you and sort of have you share at least your broader perspective on your experience as a board member, given what you've said so far. I mean, I don't know what your first board assignment was or when it was, but have things changed?
Oh, yes, significantly. It was a long time ago, smaller company and not relevant what it was. And the difference now, boards, when I first started serving on boards, it was literally like hands off. You go run the business, tell us what happened at the end of your quarter, and we'll say something about that generally. We were really involved with succession of the CEO and pay. But everything else was kind of left up to the guys to go do their thing. Nowadays, we may have swung the pendulum a little bit too far, where in some of the boards they're involved with operations, which I'm not really sure it's the best place for them to spend their time either, but it has swung very significantly. Engagement, I think you said it, Bill. I mean, it's like everything that we do. I'm on the board of Uber. Literally, our board meetings are we are engaged, we are deep, we talk about not only what's happening today, but how people are feeling in the company, what the environmental impact of moves are, everything. So I think we may have gone too far, but I
Too
think
far in what way?
getting into operations, I think that some board members are just not good at it. They've never done it before. But I think a good lead director or chair can actually navigate that. So I prefer it now versus before. Strategy big, very deeply engaged in understanding how employees are feeling. This is another thing that's really interesting. Getting input from employee surveys. They review that at the board meetings now. It's really a completely different set of responsibilities than even 20 years ago.
Betsy, you've had long experience on boards as well. Do you share that perspective?
I think a lot of what you say has absolutely been my experience. I think if you go back, I'd say we're in like the fourth generation of board governance. You had the 70s where they wanted you to just vote and be quiet. And then you had WorldCom with the giant kerfuffle and Enron, and coming out of that, you had Sarbanes-Oxley. And it caused, because the board members weren't speaking at those big companies because they were managed by management, you had the executive session and the strategy offsite. And then, now I think we are much more future-leaning than we ever were. Looking, what's around the corner? How's our company going to stay vibrant? How are we going to keep our precious human capital and invest in them and get them productive? So I think that it's the best era of board governance.
I agree. It's best and most interesting, of course. I mean, I think 10 years from now, we're going to be probably saying that that's probably the best, but right now it's the most interesting, broadly engaged, a little bit of knowledge about a lot of different things has to be brought to the table. It's a good time to be a board member.
I'm sorry.
And I was going to say, I think we're living in some of the most challenging and difficult times for directors. That line has moved, I think, with respect to what is the proper role of the board in oversight? Yeah. What information is material? I mean, you look at, Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light. I mean, you look at all these issues. Yeah. And the question is, should the board have been told about the marketing strategy?
Well, I'm not sure that even the higher-ups in Anheuser-Busch knew exactly about this one particular instance.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this has been blown out of proportion.
And so I'm not saying they should have, but it raises that issue is with respect to your duty of loyalty and ensuring that you understand all things that are material to the company. How much should the board be told about the marketing strategy? How much should the board be involved in how we respond to COVID? How much should the board be involved in? Are we really giving training to our employees so everybody understands that we appreciate what everybody brings to the table? I mean, board composition, the NomGov committee's role in that, selection, training, I mean, all those are issues that I think that are expanding more and more every day. And because the board is in the most challenging role I think boards have ever been.
But David, you said it. You said, should they have known this whole thing about you can't know everything? That's why I think it's an interesting time. I mean, I think we're not perfect today, but we're going to have to feel our way forward. I think we have that shareholders and definitely governments have high expectations on boards nowadays. And I think, therefore, you got to get deeper. It's better to be deeper than far away. And if you have a good CEO, you can work your way through that.
That whole, what is it? Fingers in, noses out.
That's right.
I mean, as board members, we have to know the right questions to ask. Mm-hmm. We don't have to know all the answers to them. But we have to ask the right questions.
It's interesting, the velocity of change and the social issues that hurtle at you and the surprises you get from your company like the Anheuser-Busch. I think it's a new muscle of super fast cycle to respond. The CEO has to be social ready. You can look at what happened at United when they killed the pet and they dragged the Asian passenger off, and then the CEO lawyered up, and like 32 hours later, he made a very unempathetic, statement. And that doesn't work anymore. You actually have to be crisis ready and authentic and social first. And and be genuine. And people have, your company and your customers have to see that you care. And
Yeah.
that's a different muscle for boards.
Meanwhile, Ursula, you also have to be thinking about our relationship with China, reglobalization, what's going on in the world, cyber, of course, which is a huge issue and at any moment can change the entire conversation at a company.
Yeah, and I think it is changing as we speak, the entire conversation in just about every company. Just about every company. It's funny, in another role that I have, I chair a company, great CEO advisory firm called Teneo, and we do a survey every year of what the top 500 CEOs are thinking or what they're worried about. And it's really amazing how much cyber is on their mind, What they do about it is all over the place, but it's a concern. Obviously, the Ukraine and Russia, big issue, and China the third. So China is, even for companies that have very little to no business in China, there's a huge concern about whether or not access to that market for their future will still be allowed in a fair and equitable way. And if you listen to the government policy, that's the goal. The goal is to have, we know that we have huge differentiation in how we govern and what our roles of governance are with respect to our citizens. But the market there is huge, and we want to have access to it, but we want it to be fair and obviously protecting of our requirements and our needs. And I think that that's a good approach that the government has. How you do it is not clear. It's not clear how you do that yet. In Russia and the Ukraine, I think it's also unbelievably coalesced. Its impact on Europe and European growth is a direct concern of all businesses that I'm engaged with. Its impact on the U.S. and how we are funding a huge amount of response for the Ukrainians and what it does to our debt levels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that all of these things are now active and front. It's small companies have no reason. In the past, you say, you don't have to worry about this.
Right.
They are worried about it across the board. Cyber, China, Russia, and the Ukraine.
Russia,
Big deal.
Ukraine, too.
Yeah, for sure. Russia, Ukraine, big deal. Big deal. And it's much about sentiment.
Bill, you agree with that? I mean, if you had to rank things in terms of what you want your board worrying about or what they are worried about, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the industry, too. For example, I am aware of a very large retail company that had 15,000 employees between Russia and the Ukraine, and their business continuity was completely shot when they got out of Russia, and then they had people literally in the field working in the most gruesome of circumstances, and that put enormous pressure on the rest of their business model, and then they had to rethink what they were doing in China and how they were going to reprice things, and the only market where they had pricing power was the US. So directly or indirectly, you're absolutely right, it comes full circle, Ursula. So it may not be the number one thing in our boardroom, other than the humanitarian piece of it, which is obvious, but it depends on the industry that the customers are in, what I see them most worried about. But consistently, security, you could put that on the top of the list. 98% of the CEOs in the world have security as their number one issue. And that's why you can't meet a financial services firm here today that won't tell you integrated risk management is the number one thing on their mind, because of the downside, not only to the risk, but also the financial risk of actually not complying on a governance level, as Chris was saying earlier. So that's really big. I really do believe every single business, and I'm not just saying this because it's a ServiceNow announcement, it really isn't the case. These companies are not productive, and they're not productive as they can be in many cases because one department can't talk to another department who doesn't connect with the customer, who can't help the employees, and the customers can't self-serve. And just think of all of this going on at the same time. We have one of the biggest breakthroughs in tech history with generative AI. So if you can use the modern digital tools to solve some of the world's biggest problems, you can change the narrative on these business models dramatically. And right now, what concerns me is there's such focus on cost takeout, margin expansion at the expense of revenue, and in some cases, jobs. You wonder what culture is going to be left when the smoke clears.
I really agree with you on this. Like,
That,
so much.
that's the thing. So one of the questions I got today from one of the one-on-ones I did, how are you dealing with it? Grow, man. Take an idea. We're an idea. The U.S. is an idea. Your company's an idea. What is the new idea that gets you there? Well, one of them is you got to create end-to-end digital transformation in these companies so people have great experiences, so customers can serve themselves. There'll be 750 million net new applications built in the next 2 years by companies for themselves. You're going to be able to text to code, text to workflow automation, and text to new application development on platforms that can do it. That changes the game. New ideas, new growth, new innovation. We got to get going. Because if all it is let's take cost out, lay some people off, and expand the margin, and hold off Wall Street for a while, we're kidding ourselves.
But that's what globalization clearly went too far. And went too far in order to maximize short-term profitability. Mm-hmm. We moved some core competencies to jurisdictions that were done with purely short-term, for short-term reasons, to save a few dollars. Having design in here and having manufacturing halfway across the world, over time, you make worse products than if you have design and manufacturing sit side by side. And we're at the point now where, well, not quite at the point, we're getting to the point to where as we're seeing this deglobalization and we start to see manufacturing start to return, it will require, obviously, automation, require more software, but it will also start to rebuild some of these communities that have been completely destroyed over the course of the last 60 years of rapid globalization. And that's constructive. And I think over time, manufacturing where you sell, it makes common sense.
Well, I think NVIDIA would tell you we design lots of really great chips, and it's not bad having them made at TSMC halfway across the world. It works just fine for us. And by the way, are you getting ready to tell everybody how much more money they're going to have to spend for whatever is produced here, because it's going to cost a lot more? And that's going to have an impact on people's quality of life.
Well, I'm sorry, explain that last part again.
Say again?
Could you say that last part again? I didn't hear it.
No, you're talking about bringing manufacturing back and how that's going to be beneficial. Many people would agree.
Yeah.
But there's a cost to that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There is logical, take for example, last year, Deere tractor couldn't ship, I can't remember how many thousands of tractors because of a single sourced oil filter made outside of Shanghai. There's $1 million tractor, single-sourced oil filter. That story exists. As we found out throughout COVID, we have supply chains that are not resilient for any sort of global shock. And as the world has moved from having a fairly well-oiled trade machine to having a less well-oiled trade machine, there are going to have to be changes. And cost will go up, and it will drive inflation.
David, the fact of the matter is that businesses did exactly what you would do if your fundamental only focus is on shareholder return. They found the place that had the cheapest whatever, labor, source product, whatever, and went there. It wasn't here, definitely isn't here. Lifestyle is different, etc. I think that as we start to expand the stakeholders to include like other humans, like the people who buy, the government security, whatever, we're going to have to deal with the fact that I'm like you, waiting like you. When I ran Xerox, I always said, if you want to make it here down the street, this thing is going to cost you 25% more. Are you willing to pay 25% more? And literally 100% of the time, the answer is no. So we're going to have to face this reality that to bring it here in the short term, probably even in the medium to long term, it's going to cost more money. But the good overall, because we're changing the measurement system from just EBITDA or EBITDA multiples or whatever the hell, cash flow, to a broader set of inputs, we're going to have to do that. Otherwise, we're going to literally be chasing our tail, trying to find the cheapest thing with one source. One
right?
source.
But doesn't that just lead to protectionism to a certain extent?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be
if you're Xerox and you're competing against Fuji and then, in a global market, and your products cost 25% more, you're not going to do very well.
This is where we have to be more logical. This has been pretty simple. We're pretty mature, well-educated humans, right? And we know how to do the cost thing. Walk in the store, one is 1 cent, 2 cents, I'll buy it at 1 cent. We're going to have to sell more, inform and educate more about why that thing costs 2 cents and why, therefore, you should buy it over the 1 cent thing. I get it. It's going to be hard, right? We've failed every time we've tried this, but that's why we are where we are.
But it also gets back to what Chris, I think, was talking about, which is measuring the value of
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
And how you do that and how you translate that
But we're
to a broader
smart
audience
humans.
or how a board thinks about doing
David,
it. I don't know.
we figured out a way to do everything, right? We've got people to the moon. We're smart humans. Give us time, working on the right set of problems. We'll be able to do this. I am not convinced that we can't have discourse in the workplace and have a good place to work. I'm not convinced that we can't figure out a way to consider 3 things versus 1. By the way, if that's the way it is, then we might as well give up right now, because there's no way out of this. We're going to have to be broader.
Jarvis, you think you could sell that to the Texas Finance Committee?
I agree with Ursula on that. I don't think we have a choice. I really don't. And when you go through these disruptions, these world issues, it bears out these kinds of difficult issues, these deficiencies in the system where you're simply chasing cost. Because long-term return is a multiple over periods of time, over multiple stages. It's not a time and a place at one point in time.
It's not 90 days, that's for damn sure, right?
Not 9 days.
No, but there are a lot of companies right now, top of mind is figuring out a way out of China to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think that's
kind of separate our...
I think re-globalization is important. We have become singularly dependent on an economy and a system that's not necessarily aligned with us at all time. For our future safety, we're going to have to figure out another process, for sure. There are other economies that we can actually go to, and we should. I don't think we can walk away from China, and I damn sure don't think we can fight them every day, not because of the war fight. I mean, we have to cooperate on the environment. We have to cooperate on health. If we don't, then, I mean, it just doesn't work. So we're going to have to figure out a way to play well, but also compete. And that's what we all, as business leaders, have to do, and government leaders have to do, and news people have to do.
Chris, I want to come back to, in our brief moments left, sort of ESG, DEI. Do we need new names entirely, too? Have they become too stigmatized in this whole conversation?
Yeah. I mean, think about how many acronyms we've gone through in the last 20 years. Remember, we had SRI, sustainable investing. We've gone to ESG. CSR, yeah. Like, none of these
Corporate
acronyms...
social responsibility.
Right, exactly. None of these are going to stick until we are able to explain why these criteria are going to drive long-term value. When they drive long-term value, then it's not an ideological debate. It's, we're doing this, and when I say long-term value, long-term is important. Just like as we were talking about earlier around manufacturing, if it's going to cost an extra 15% to manufacture in a real low-cost jurisdiction, but that low-cost jurisdiction has an enormous amount of political volatility, and because the complexity of supply chains increase exponentially every time you add a node. And so I think we have to be able to take all of these criteria that we're talking about and start to link them to value. And if we do so, and I think we can pull together both sides of the aisle, we can pull together board members, we can pull together employees, and it helps pull all of us towards the same direction. But if we're in debating a social issue, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who sat around a dinner table that hasn't an argument about a social table, let alone having 100,000 employees. Like, so I think, and the social issues that we can tie to performance, those are the ones that I think are going to have long-term traction.
Well, and I mean, look, I don't disagree, but I think that's where boards have failed, and that's where I think management has failed.
Absolutely.
They've not made those issues germane to their specific business and how it's relevant to what they do every day and create shareholder value. So it's not the concepts themselves, it's how we're managing them as directors as well as senior management.
Very well said.
That seems as good a place as any to stop. Interesting conversation, went in some directions I didn't expect. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.